It started with a group chat silence that said more than any rejection letter ever could. No RSVP, no follow-up call, not even a casual congrats when I sent the invite, just red receipts, and weeks of quiet that settled over my engagement like dust on a shelf no one wanted to touch. I had always known my wedding wouldn't be their dream. I didn't want a ballroom, 100 guests, or a registry full of things I'd never use. I wanted a garden ceremony with wildflowers and mismatched chairs, music that made people cry instead of dance, vows we wrote ourselves under a willow tree that had stood longer than most marriages. When I told my mother, her voice cracked with polite disapproval. "Well, it's certainly unique," she said, dragging out the last word like it had thorns. My sister didn't respond at all. She was too busy planning her own engagement party with a 4-tier cake and a guest list that looked more like a corporate directory than a celebration. And my father? He asked if there would be valet parking. When I said no, he mumbled something about setting standards and what people will think, like love needed a catering minimum to be real. But still, I hoped. I sent the invitations anyway, hand-pressed, handwritten, sealed with wax because I believed details still mattered. I included directions, RSVP cards, and even a note that said, "All we want is your presence, no gifts." 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The only responses I got were from friends, real friends, the kind who knew what it took to build something from scratch, people who remembered when we ate boxed mac and cheese together and still talked about love like it was sacred. Meanwhile, my mother called to ask if she could opt out gracefully. My sister posted a photo captioned, "Real weddings deserve real budgets." My father never called at all. I didn't beg. I didn't explain. I just crossed their names off the list and added 3 more wildflower bouquets in their place. The night before the ceremony, I stood in the tiny garden behind our cottage, fairy lights blinking like fireflies in the dusk, and I felt more peace than I had in months. Not because I had everything, but because I had what mattered. The man I was marrying had seen me at my worst and loved me harder. Our friends had baked the pies themselves, the playlist was a labor of nostalgia, and the guest book was just a typewriter with a sign that read, "Tell us a story, not your name." I didn't need a family heirloom to make it meaningful. I was building something new. I went to bed that night not sad, not bitter, just clear. If they couldn't show up for the beginning of my forever, they wouldn't get to rewrite it when it bloomed. The morning of the wedding arrived with soft sunlight leaking through gauzy curtains and the smell of fresh bread from the neighbor's kitchen drifting through the open window, and I woke up not to chaos, not to stylists or planners or screaming relatives, but to my best friend sitting at the edge of the bed holding 2 cups of coffee and whispering, "You're getting married today," like it was a secret she'd been keeping just for me. There was no rush, no parade of people with clipboards and walkie-talkies, just slow music playing from a record player, the clink of glassware being set up in the garden, and the steady rhythm of people who wanted to be there, moving through the house like they were part of a living memory. I wore a dress I had bought secondhand, altered with lace from my grandmother's sewing box. My shoes were flats. My bouquet? Hand-packed wildflowers from the nearby trail we hiked on our second date. And still, it felt rich, full, golden. My partner got ready in the room next door, no nerves, just grinning like he'd waited a lifetime for this. When we met under the willow tree, there were no pews, just chairs borrowed from every neighbor within 5 blocks. And when the music started, an old jazz tune that had no business sounding so perfect, it felt like the world had shrunk to the exact size it was supposed to be. My friends cried, not the performative kind of tears people shed for Instagram stories, but real ones, the kind that come from watching someone choose themselves in front of everyone who didn't. I read my vows with steady hands. He read his with cracked laughter and a voice that caught halfway through. We kissed like we had no audience, and when it was done, there was no confetti, no limo, no grand exit. Just long tables under the trees, bowls of shared food, wine poured from mismatched bottles, and conversations that ran deep into the evening like streams crossing in the dark. At one point, someone asked if I missed them, my family, and I looked around at the joy, the ease, the absence of judgment and said, "No, not today," because I wasn't grieving them anymore. I was growing past them. That night, someone snapped a photo of me and my husband barefoot in the grass, his jacket off, my hair loose, the string lights casting gold across our shoulders like we'd been lit from within. That photo would go on to live a life of its own, but in that moment, it was just ours. No captions, no commentary, just a frame that caught exactly what they said was too small to matter and made it unforgettable. 3 days after the wedding, I posted the photos. Not all of them, just a handful that felt honest. Like the one where we were mid-laugh during the toast, or the one where my husband had a smear of frosting on his nose and didn't care because he was too busy dancing with a little girl who called him uncle. Or the one where I was twirling barefoot under a string of lights, hair down, eyes closed, looking more like myself than I ever had in my entire life. And I didn't write a long caption or tag vendors or use trendy hashtags. I just wrote, "We did it," and it was perfect. The reaction was immediate, not from strangers, but from family. My cousin commented first, "Wait, this was the wedding?" Like I'd somehow hidden it from them, like it wasn't their own silence that had drawn the line. Then came the private messages. An aunt who'd RSVP'd maybe wrote, "I wish we had known it would be so beautiful." My brother, who said he had a work trip that weekend, texted, "Is it too late to say congratulations?" But the one that landed with the sharpest edge came from my mother. "We thought it would be smaller, less serious. Didn't think it was worth the travel." As if my love needed a guest list to be legitimate. As if vows exchanged without their applause somehow carried less weight. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had finally run out of reasons to explain myself to people who only know how to measure worth by spectacle. A week later, the photos started circulating, friends tagging each other, sharing memories, reposting the laughter, the dancing, the wildflower arrangements that somehow looked more luxurious than any floral arch a planner could have designed. I got a DM from an old classmate, "This looks like something out of a movie." And another from someone I barely knew, "I've never seen a wedding look so free." That word, free. It stuck with me, because that's what it had been. Free of expectation, free of obligation, free of the heaviness that comes from trying to impress people who will never be impressed by anything that doesn't reflect their own taste back to them. My husband printed one of the photos, the one of us, under the willow, and hung it in the hallway. "Every time they walk in, they'll see it," he said. "They'll know what they missed." I smiled, but I didn't hang it for them. I hung it for me. For the girl who used to dream of approval like it was currency. For the woman who finally stopped spending her love on people who treated it like loose change. That photo isn't proof of what they missed, it's proof that I didn't. The next message I received wasn't public. It was a voice memo from my sister, almost 2 minutes long, filled with stammered justifications and half-hearted apologies that felt more like self-defense than remorse. And somewhere between the words, "We didn't think it was real," and "You should have made it clearer," I stopped listening. Because what she was really saying wasn't that they misunderstood, it was that they underestimated, again, as they always had, mistaking my quietness for uncertainty, my simplicity for lack of depth, my love for something they could opt in or out of based on aesthetics and convenience. I replayed only the last line. "You should have told us it was going to be like that." Like what? Meaningful? Beautiful? Enough without them? I didn't respond. I was learning that silence speaks louder than rebuttals, especially when the other person only hears regret in proportion to the praise they missed out on. And the truth is, they didn't skip the wedding because they couldn't attend. They skipped it because they didn't believe in it, because they didn't see the value in something they didn't orchestrate, because they still thought their absence could diminish my joy, that their presence was a gift instead of a privilege. But what they failed to see was that my joy wasn't built on their approval. It was built on a foundation they never laid. On the nights we planned everything ourselves, just the two of us hunched over a laptop, giggling about whether to serve cupcakes or pie, practicing our first dance barefoot in the kitchen while the cat wove between our feet. It was built on the friends who showed up early to hang string lights in the trees, who cooked in borrowed aprons, who picked wildflowers in the morning and arranged them with love that didn't need to be curated for social media. It was built on presence, real presence. And as the photos continued to make their quiet rounds online, I noticed something shift. People who hadn't RSVP'd started posting about regrets, tagging me in memes about FOMO, some even commenting on how they should have known you'd do something cool. I didn't reply, not because I was bitter, but because by now, I understood what they were saying wasn't really about me. It was about them. About their assumptions, about their ego, about how uncomfortable it is to realize you missed something real because you couldn't see past what it didn't look like. And when my cousin called and said we should have been there, I said simply, "You could have been." And then I let the silence land, because there was nothing else to say. They hadn't just missed a wedding, they had missed the moment I stopped asking to be seen and became someone who no longer needed their eyes to feel visible. The story might have ended there, with muted apologies and passive regrets, but the algorithm had other plans, because a week after the wedding, a popular lifestyle blogger I didn't even know had shared one of our ceremony photos. My dress sweeping the ground in golden light, my partner beaming like the sun itself, the trees behind us strung with fairy lights and laughter. And suddenly, the internet was full of strangers celebrating the thing my family couldn't be bothered to acknowledge. Comments poured in. This is what love looks like. Proof that small doesn't mean insignificant. You can feel the happiness through the screen. And every like, every repost, every saved image felt like a quiet reversal of the story I'd been told for so long, that validation had to come from the people who shared your blood, that your joy only mattered if it looked like theirs, that love had to be loud to be real. But here it was, undeniable, luminous, alive, and it didn't need their permission to exist. My inbox filled with messages from old classmates, colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years, even my former boss, who once criticized me for being too soft, sent a note that simply read, "This moved me." And it hit me, not like a wave, but like clarity, that sometimes the smallest room holds the biggest truth, and sometimes the quietest vows echo the longest. Meanwhile, my family tried to re-enter the conversation in their usual way, not by saying sorry, but by rewriting the story. My aunt posted a throwback photo of us at a cousin's wedding, captioned, "Family is forever." My mother reshared a post about the importance of presence, as if her own absence had been strategic, not dismissive. I didn't comment. I didn't correct. Because at some point, you stop needing to explain the gaps they refuse to cross. You just live beyond them. That weekend, I hosted a dinner, not a reception, not a second celebration, just a quiet meal with the people who'd been there. Our friends, our photographer, the baker who doubled as a witness, even the neighbor who'd brought over her vintage china, just in case you wanted something special. We lit candles, played music, passed wine and stories around a table we built ourselves. And as we sat under the same trees where we'd said our vows, I looked around and thought, this is the real guest list. No formal invitations, no curated photos, just people who showed up, not for the show, for the substance, for us. And in that space I felt full, not of revenge, not of pride, just of something softer, steadier, something that no absence could puncture, because I had stopped mourning who wasn't there and started cherishing who always had been. The shift happened quietly, not with fireworks or fanfare, but in the simple way a phone call went unanswered and a voicemail went unreturned. Because the truth is, once you've stopped begging for a seat at the table, you start building your own. And when my cousin texted, "I think everyone's ready to talk now," I didn't rush to respond, because the timing no longer belonged to them, and I wasn't in the business of translating silence into apology anymore. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped onto the porch with the late autumn sun brushing my face, and scrolled through the album our photographer had sent. Dozens of moments captured with such intimacy and grace that it made me wonder how anyone could have thought this wedding wasn't enough. My partner dancing barefoot on the grass, my veil catching the light like a blessing. The laughter, the softness, the steadiness of it all. There wasn't a single forced smile in sight. Just presence. Just love. My phone buzzed again. This time from my mother. "Your dress looked beautiful," she wrote. No punctuation, no follow-up, just that. And I stared at it for a long time, wondering if this was her way of reaching out or if it was just an attempt to soften her own discomfort. Either way, I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't interested in being a project they could slowly take credit for supporting once it no longer cost them anything. My friend Mia, who had helped set up the ceremony space and cried when we read our vows, came over that afternoon with pie and a deck of tarot cards. "Pull one," she said, placing the stack in front of me. I did. The card read, "The world, completion, wholeness, integration," she smiled. "That's the one you get when you've finished a chapter you were never meant to stay in." And that's exactly what it felt like. A final page turned without needing permission from the characters who stopped showing up halfway through the story. That weekend, someone from my father's side messaged me on Facebook. An uncle I hadn't seen in years. "Saw the wedding photos. We were surprised by how lovely it all looked." And there it was again. That word. Surprised. As if elegance, joy, and depth were things I had to earn in their eyes, not simply embody without their approval. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Because I had learned something vital. When you stop performing worthiness for people committed to misunderstanding you, you don't lose value. You reclaim it. in full. That Sunday, we took down the decorations from the trees, folded the linens, saved the handwritten vows in a box labeled ours. And in that quiet, I realized something. The life we were building didn't need validation. It just needed protection. And now it had both. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, the photos began making the rounds. Not just the carefully chosen ones we posted ourselves, but the candid shots shared by guests. The reels edited with music that captured the rhythm of the day, the genuine laughter, the sunset vows, the unfiltered joy. And suddenly, people who hadn't spoken to me in months were flooding my inbox with messages that started with, "I had no idea," and ended with, "You looked so happy," as if that absolved them from what came before. My aunt messaged to say she hadn't realized we meant it when we said it would be small. "I just assumed there'd be a second ceremony for the family," she wrote, like intimacy was an oversight that needed correcting. One of my sisters, who had RSVP'd with "not worth the flight" for something so minimal, left a comment under a friend's post of our first dance. "Wow, this looks amazing." Just 3 words, but they dripped with everything she hadn't said to me directly. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the uncomfortable recognition that the thing they dismissed had blossomed without them. My father didn't say anything publicly, but he watched every story, liked every tag. His silence didn't ache anymore. It confirmed something I had already come to accept. Some people only value what they can control, and when you remove yourself from their narrative, they don't know how to show up without a script. That same week, our photographer published a feature on our wedding in a local lifestyle blog headlined, "A Backyard Ceremony That Redefined Elegance." And the article captured what I had hoped for all along, that this wasn't a wedding built to impress. It was a day built to reflect. And in the details, the hand-picked wildflowers, the mismatched chairs, the handwritten place cards, there was a kind of truth no one could deny, not even those who chose not to witness it. I got messages from strangers, too. People I'd never met commenting on how grounded it all looked, how peaceful, how intentional. "This feels like the kind of love that doesn't need a crowd to be real," one woman wrote, and I cried reading that. Because it was the kind of love that had survived ridicule, skepticism, and quiet abandonment. It was the kind of love that knew how to protect itself without becoming hardened. That weekend, we had dinner with the friends who'd been there. No speeches, no fanfare, just food and conversation and candlelight. And during dessert, one of them raised a glass. "To showing up," she said, "even when others don't." Everyone nodded. No bitterness, just knowing. And I realized then that this was my real family. Not the one I was born into, but the one that stayed, that celebrated without condition, that never needed convincing to believe in me. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is celebrate yourself out loud, even when the people you wanted there decide not to show. I posted one photo, just one, on a quiet Sunday morning long after the buzz had faded and the inbox had gone still. A single image of me and my husband walking hand in hand across the lawn, backlit by golden light, the breeze lifting the hem of my dress, our shadows long and connected, and I captioned it with 5 simple words. It was always enough, us. No hashtags, no explanations, just that. And somehow, that image traveled further than anything I could have planned. It ended up shared, reshared, saved to vision boards, pinned to digital dreamscapes, and suddenly, we were the couple that proved simplicity wasn't a consolation prize, it was a choice, a declaration, a quiet rebellion against the noise. My cousin called me the next day, not to apologize, just to say she'd shown her friend the photo and her friend had cried. "I didn't know it was going to be that beautiful," she said quietly, and I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. "That's the thing," I replied. "You didn't ask." Because they hadn't. None of them did. They'd dismissed it before it even happened, decided it was unworthy, unremarkable, too small to matter. But it did matter. It mattered to us. The next week, my mother sent me a box. Inside was my old veil, the one she'd worn at her own wedding. The one she said I couldn't have because you'll want something newer, trendier, not this outdated thing. No note, just the veil, folded neatly, like a peace offering pressed between regret and ritual. I didn't send it back, but I didn't wear it either, because that version of me, the one who waited for their blessing, who shrank to accommodate their doubts, who over-explained everything, wasn't coming back. She got married and left the altar with a new kind of certainty, not defiant, just done waiting. I lit a candle that evening and placed the veil in a drawer beside other things I no longer needed. Unanswered texts, rehearsed explanations, years of bending to fit into a frame that never made space for my full self. A few months later, we hosted a gathering. Nothing formal, just music, homemade food, friends curled up on mismatched cushions, laughter loud enough to rattle the windows. My husband played guitar, I danced barefoot in the grass, and one of our neighbors, an older woman I'd barely spoken to before, lingered at the fence and finally said, "I wish someone had told me that joy could look like this." And I smiled, because that was the point. Joy doesn't need an RSVP list. Love doesn't require an audience. And the most meaningful milestones aren't always witnessed by the people you thought would be there. Sometimes, they're witnessed by the ones who simply stayed, the ones who saw you not as an obligation, but as a choice. I don't replay the hurt anymore. I don't scroll through the messages that never came or reread the excuses people tried to wrap in civility, because the truth is, I didn't miss out. They did. They missed watching something real, something soft and sacred, and full of everything they claimed to want but never knew how to recognize. And me? I gained exactly what I needed. A beginning that didn't ask for permission, a family that started with choice, not obligation, and a reminder that the people who truly love you will never be too busy, too critical, or too proud to show up. That they'll come in jeans or formal wear or bare feet, holding casseroles or guitars or nothing at all, and it won't matter, because they came. They came because they knew it wasn't about the spectacle, it was about presence. So if you've ever had to celebrate without the ones you thought would stand beside you, know this: your joy still counts. Your love still matters, and one day they'll see the photos, but by then you'll have already moved on to the next chapter, too busy living a life they never imagined for you but you always imagined for yourself. And in that chapter, you won't just be the bride, you'll be the architect of something far more enduring.